Hey folks, quick primer on something that's important as you read up about courts and trials. Um, I want to make it clear about what the difference is between civil and criminal cases. And sometimes they overlap. And as you can see, I've got a Google search of O.J. Simpson because it's a case that maybe you may remember, maybe not. It was before your time, but this was in, I guess, mid 90s, right? This was the first, major televised criminal trial, and it kind of marked a turning point where um, trials became kind of media events as well as legal events. But it illustrates the difference between civil and criminal trials as well. So, quick primer: O.J. Simpson had been a star football player in college and the pros. He was like the best running back in the pros. He won the Heisman Award in college, and he had a very successful pro career. And after he retired from football, he was one of the first kind of crossover stars where he was going making movies. He appeared in the Airplane movies. He appeared in a lot of commercials and TV shows. He had um, you know relatively good looking guy. He was made for TV and movies, and so he was kind of like The Rock. He was going to be an athlete who then turned his athletic career into a entertainment career. And one night, I think his estranged wife, I don't know if they were divorced or not, was found dead outside of her house in Brentwood, California. Um, and she had been murdered. And a waiter from a local restaurant was also found dead there. His name was Daniel Goldman. And suspicion fell on O.J. Simpson, who was her husband or ex-husband or estranged husband, and people began to realize that there had been evidence of abuse in the marriage, and OJ was behaving really erratically, and there was a lot of evidence that suggested that he had been there. They found footprints, they found that matched his shoes, they found he had cuts on his hand. He was behaving really erratically. He flew away that night to go someplace and broke a mirror in his hotel room. Then he came back and he was about to be arrested, and he fled with his best friend, a guy named AJ or AC Cowling, I believe his name was. And there was a slow motion car chase on the freeway on the 405 in Los Angeles, which if you know LA at all is a major freeway. And there was the white Bronco that AJ was driving, or that AC was driving, and OJ was in it. And stories were that he had a gun, he was going to kill himself, or he was going to flee to Mexico, blah blah blah. The police were chasing it. Eventually, they got him to surrender, and he was charged with murder. And there was a long trial in which O.J. Simpson was represented by a kind of really star-studded defense attorney lineup, um, including a lot of big names in the defense bar in California and the country, actually. Johnny Cochran was one of them, who was very well known and very successful. But there were others. Alan Dershowitz was there as well. Kim Kardashian's Robert Kardashian was involved. He was a friend of OJ's, and there was some evidence that he put forth. Anyway, after a long trial that was televised, where there were lots of mistakes made, probably by both sides, ultimately the jury read the verdict and they acquitted O.J. Simpson of murder. They said that he didn't do it, or they said that what they said was the prosecution had not proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt. And that is the standard in a criminal trial. In a criminal trial, the the one side is the people, the prosecution, that's the state of California or the federal government. And then there's the defendant who's accused of a crime. And a crime, the punishments are usually jail or restitution, but usually, if you're found guilty of a crime, you face jail. The standard of proof, because the presumption is that the government has a substantial advantage in resources, uh, the law requires that the government, the prosecution, prove its case in a criminal trial beyond a reasonable doubt. And there's always a lot of question about what's a reasonable doubt. And that's why criminal trials are always kind of dicey, because juries interpret reasonable doubt differently. So after OJ was acquitted of the charge of murder, he did not go to jail. He was a free man. He was then sued in civil court, sued by the families of of Nicole Brown Simpson and Daniel Goldman. And they sued him in civil court. And in civil court, they said he was responsible. He was legally responsible for the death. It was a wrongful death suit. Now, how can they do that? Well, it's because the standard of proof in a criminal and a civil trial are different. In a civil trial, you have two private parties who bring cases about their disputes. And in civil court, the verdicts usually are accompanied by a monetary award. In civil court, you only have to prove your case by what's called a preponderance of evidence, meaning that there is more evidence that you are liable than there is that you are not liable. It's a much lower standard of proof. So in the civil trial, the families of the two victims of this murder, of this crime, this murder, sued O.J. Simpson and said he was responsible. While he might not have been criminally guilty, he was responsible in some way. And at the civil trial, the jury came back and agreed, and they said O.J. Simpson was responsible civilly for the deaths. And they awarded a monetary award of, I think at the time it was $33 million against O.J. Simpson. He had to pay that to the families of the victims. Now, sometimes when there's a damage award, there are certain kinds of assets and resources that can't be touched in a civil damages award, whether it's a pension or whether it's a main home or whether it's certain kinds of possessions. There are some things that a civil damages award is not allowed to go after. And frankly, it's the case that sometimes getting a losing party to pay the award is a difficult thing. Of course, interest accrues if you don't pay it, and there are various things that parties can do to try to get the money out of a civil defendant who isn't paying. You can, for example, put a lien on property. So, if O.J. Simpson owned a home, they could put a lien on the sale of the home so that if O.J. ever sold the home, the money had to come to them first. Or they could put liens on various other things, boats or cars or any kind of personal or real property. They could require him to pay certain amounts of money if he ever had a job that paid a wage, or if he ever came into a big award of money in any way. Anyway, so O.J. kind of there was some times when he sold some of his football stuff and got money, but he was never really close to paying back the damages award in the civil trial. And a crazy thing happened much later. O.J. wrote a book called If I Did It. And it was going to be a bestseller because these books, when they come out, bookstores order tons of them because people want to read this kind of stuff. And right before the book was going to come out, the families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Daniel Goldman said, "Hey, you know what? The money you get for this book has to come to us." And O.J. Simpson said, "Well, I'm not going to do it then." And he told his publisher to scrap the book. The book was written, it was ready to go to press, it was ready to go to the bookstores, and O.J. said, "Well, I'm not going to do it if I have to pay the money to you guys." And what the families did was the families went ahead and they bought the rights to the book, and they produced it, and with like a forward, from them putting out their position. And when the book sold, they took the money. That's a crazy illustration of how you can be criminally and civilly charged. You can also imagine a drunk driving case where a person drunk driving causes an accident that results in damage and even death. They can be criminally prosecuted for the crime of driving under the influence of alcohol, but they can also be civilly sued, right, by the family of the people that they hit, or by the person they hit, by the person who owns the car they hit. So we have two parallel systems in court. A criminal system and a civil system. In the criminal side, it's the state who's prosecuting the case, and defendants usually are found guilty and they go to jail. Or not, if they're found guilty, they go to jail. On the civil side, it's private parties resolving disputes, and the remedy is usually money. So that's how these two things differ, and that's in our that is in our PowerPoints as well. But I thought talking about OJ might be a way to illustrate it even better. By the way, just as an aside, I was in law school when the verdict was read, and a lot of the law students had gathered in the common room to watch the verdict. In fact, the whole country at that point was kind of really engrossed in this case. It was the first major murder case that was that the trial had cameras in the courtroom, and the local news came to our law school to get reaction to the verdict. And you have never seen people scatter faster than when the verdict came out and the local media wanted to ask law students questions about what they thought. Nobody wanted to be on the news, weighing in one way or the other on the result of this case. There was a lot going on. There were allegations of racism by the LA police. There were allegations of prosecutorial misconduct. There were all kinds of things going on in the case, and it was a really interesting case to observe as a lawyer or a law student. Showed a lot of flaws in the criminal justice system, but it also it was a real media event as well. Really interesting case. All right, bye.